Most people preparing for emergencies spend hundreds of dollars on fancy gear and complicated systems. Meanwhile, one of the most effective water storage solutions costs about $3 and fits in your pantry. Today, we're talking about the $3 trick that stores water safely for years. Most preppers miss this. The water storage problem nobody wants to talk about. Walk into any prepper forum online, and you'll find threads thousands of posts long debating freeze-dried food brands, night vision optics, and the best bug-out vehicle. Water? It gets maybe 2 pages before everyone moves on. That's a problem, because the human body can go weeks without food, but only about 3 days without water. 3 days. So the irony of spending $400 on a tactical backpack while keeping a single case of gas station water bottles in the garage is, well, significant. The human body is roughly 60% water. When that percentage starts dropping, even slightly, cognitive function deteriorates before anything else. Decision-making gets harder, physical performance drops, and in an actual emergency, that's precisely the moment when you can least afford to be impaired. Dehydration in a crisis doesn't announce itself dramatically. It creeps in quietly while you're convinced you're thinking clearly. Most people know they should store water. FEMA has been recommending it for decades. The American Red Cross has pamphlets about it. There have been enough high-profile disasters, hurricanes, ice storms, infrastructure failures, to make the point clearly. And yet surveys of American households consistently show that most people don't have even a 3-day water supply. A 2022 survey by the Hazards and Vulnerability Research Institute found that fewer than half of American adults report having adequate emergency water supplies at home. The challenge with long-term water storage isn't just having water, it's keeping it safe, stable, and actually drinkable over time. Water doesn't technically expire, but the containers it lives in do. Plastic degrades, bacteria grows, algae develops, and contaminants leach in. What looked like a fine setup on day one can turn into something you genuinely don't want to drink 12 months later. And that's before accounting for the most common beginner mistake, using the wrong containers entirely. Before we continue, I prepared a step-by-step ebook that's currently on sale, packed with practical survival systems and simple life hacks. It's designed to help you save money, stay prepared, and improve everyday safety in a simple, realistic way. You can access it instantly while the discounted price is still available. You can find the link in the description. Now let's get back to the video. Why most water storage setups fail. Here's something a lot of guides skip over. Regular tap water already contains a small amount of chlorine, added by municipal water treatment facilities specifically to suppress bacterial growth. When you fill up a container and seal it, that chlorine doesn't last forever. Depending on the container, light exposure, and temperature, residual chlorine can dissipate within 6 months to a year. After that, whatever biological material happens to be present, and there's almost always something, starts doing what biological material does. The result isn't always dramatic. You're not necessarily going to pull the lid off a barrel and find something visibly horrifying. Sometimes the water just smells a little off. Sometimes it tastes flat or slightly chemical. Sometimes it tests positive for bacteria that have no business being in your drinking supply. None of those outcomes are acceptable when you're depending on that water. Sunlight is another underestimated enemy. Ultraviolet light breaks down certain plastics and encourages algae growth. This is why those translucent blue water barrels you see at every preparedness expo are tinted, not for aesthetics, but to block light. Clear bottles left near a window or in a garage with sun exposure are working against you from day one. Temperature swings cause containers to expand and contract, which over time can weaken seals and cause microfractures in thinner plastics. Heat also accelerates chemical leaching from containers not rated for long-term food storage. Storing water in a container that once held something else, bleach, cleaning products, motor oil, is a permanent contamination issue that no amount of rinsing fixes. So what does a $3 solution look like given all of that? The $3 solution: food-grade water treatment drops. The core of this method is unscented liquid chlorine bleach, specifically the plain sodium hypochlorite variety with no added thickeners, surfactants, or fragrances. At most grocery stores and big box retailers, a bottle of basic household bleach costs between $2 and $4. That same bottle, used correctly, can treat hundreds of gallons of water for long-term storage. The Environmental Protection Agency and the Centers for Disease Control both endorse this method for emergency water treatment. The CDC's guidance specifies using regular, unscented liquid chlorine bleach containing 6% to 8.25% sodium hypochlorite. Nothing stronger, nothing with additives. The ratio is simple. For clear water, add 8 drops of bleach per gallon. For cloudy water, double that to 16 drops per gallon. Stir, then let it sit for 30 minutes before sealing. After 30 minutes, the water should have a faint chlorine smell, similar to a swimming pool, but much milder. If it doesn't, repeat the dose and wait another 15 minutes. If it still doesn't smell faintly of chlorine, discard that water and start over with a cleaner source. As the late preparedness author Bruce Clayton wrote in his guide, Life After Doomsday, the single most important thing you can store is the ability to make water safe. He was writing about bleach. That's the trick. It's not complicated, it's not proprietary, it's not sold in a survival kit with a branded logo on the side. It's the same chemical water treatment method that municipalities and disaster relief organizations have used for over a century. The container problem and why it matters as much as the treatment. Bleach treatment only works if the container holding the water isn't actively undermining the whole effort. This is where a lot of setups fall apart, because people treat the container as an afterthought. The gold standard for long-term water storage is high-density polyethylene, better known as HDPE, marked with the recycling symbol number 2. These containers are food-grade, resistant to chemical leaching, and durable enough to handle the kind of temperature variation that a garage or basement experiences across 4 seasons. They're also opaque, which handles the sunlight problem automatically. Water-specific storage containers, the kind sold at camping supply stores or emergency preparedness retailers, are typically made of HDPE and come in sizes ranging from 5 gallons to 55-gallon barrels. A 5-gallon HDPE container runs about $8 to $15. A 55-gallon blue barrel runs roughly $30 to $60 used, or somewhat more new. But here's what people consistently overlook. Used food-grade HDPE containers are often available for next to nothing. Restaurants, bakeries, and food production facilities regularly go through large quantities of plastic containers that previously held food-safe products: cooking oil, pickles, sauces, syrups. These containers are often given away or sold for $1 or $2 each. Restaurants are particularly reliable sources. A bakery that goes through industrial quantities of food coloring or flavoring extracts produces a steady supply of 5-gallon HDPE buckets that are perfectly suited for water storage after a thorough wash. The cost of the container, in this context, doesn't have to be a barrier at all. What you cannot use: milk jugs. This one surprises people. Milk jugs are technically food grade, but they're designed for short-term use. The plastic is thinner, biodegrades relatively quickly, and the residual milk proteins in the container walls are nearly impossible to fully remove, which creates a nutrient base for bacterial growth. The American Red Cross specifically advises against using milk jugs for long-term water storage. Soda bottles, 2-liter PET plastic bottles, are actually acceptable for shorter storage periods, up to a year, as long as they're thoroughly cleaned. But for multi-year storage, HDPE is the right call. One additional consideration worth raising: lids and seals. A container is only as secure as its closure. For HDPE buckets, a proper gamma seal lid, the kind with a threaded outer ring and removable inner cap, provides a significantly better seal than a basic snap-on lid. They cost about $5 per lid and are reusable indefinitely. For larger barrels, a bung wrench and rubber bung replacement is inexpensive insurance against a slow leak that you might not notice until you've lost a significant amount of stored water. These are details that don't cost much but matter considerably over a 5-year storage cycle. Treating and filling the right way. The sequence matters here, and getting it wrong negates the whole process. Start with the container. Wash it thoroughly with dish soap and hot water, rinse until no soap residue remains, then do a quick sanitizing rinse with a diluted bleach solution, about 1 tablespoon of bleach per gallon of water. Swirl it around, let it sit for 2 minutes, dump it out, and let the container air dry. Then comes the water. Municipal tap water is the preferred source because it already contains chlorine and has been treated to meet drinking water standards. Well water can be used but requires more careful treatment and possibly pre-filtration if there are visible particulates. Fill the container completely to minimize the airspace at the top. Airspace allows for oxidation and provides room for biological activity. A container filled to the brim, sealed tightly, and stored properly is a significantly more stable environment than one with 3 inches of headspace. Add the bleach at the ratio specified, 8 drops per gallon of clear municipal tap water. For a 5-gallon container, that's 40 drops, or roughly 2 milliliters if you're using a dropper or small measuring tool. Seal the container, shake it gently to distribute the bleach, and then let it sit for 30 minutes before final sealing and storage. Label the container with the fill date. This is non-negotiable if you're maintaining any kind of rotation system. Without a date, you're guessing, and guessing on water safety is not a game worth playing. Storage location, the variable that changes everything. Treated sealed water in a proper HDPE container can last 5 years or more under the right conditions. Right conditions means a few specific things. Temperature stability is the most important factor. Ideal storage is between 50 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The cooler and more consistent, the better. Basements are excellent for this reason. Garages work in moderate climates, but can be problematic in regions with extreme summer heat. Sustained temperatures above 90 degrees accelerate plastic degradation and chlorine dissipation. An unconditioned garage in Arizona in August is not an ideal water storage facility. No direct sunlight. Even opaque containers should be kept away from direct sun. UV radiation is relentless, and while opaque containers resist it better than clear ones, there's no reason to test them unnecessarily, off the floor if possible. Concrete floors can transmit temperature fluctuations and, in some cases, leach chemicals into plastic containers over very long periods. Pallets or shelving are the preferred solution, and they're cheap or free from hardware stores, grocery stores, or shipping operations. Away from chemicals, gasoline, pesticides, cleaning products, and paint fumes can permeate certain plastics and contaminate the water inside. If your storage location doubles as a workshop or utility space, take that seriously. Distance the water supply from anything with strong fumes. The rotation system, because set it and forget it, isn't a real strategy. 5 years is the general benchmark for properly treated and stored water. That doesn't mean you fill everything up today and check back in 2031. A rotation system ensures you're always using the oldest water first and refreshing the supply regularly. The most practical approach for most households is a 2 to 3 year rotation cycle. Every 2 to 3 years, pull the oldest containers, use that water for non-drinking purposes if you're unsure, watering plants, washing, flushing, and refill them with freshly treated water. Label clearly with the new date. Some people rotate annually, which is more conservative than necessary, but certainly not wrong. The FEMA recommendation has historically suggested replacing stored water every 6 to 12 months, though that guidance is based on more cautious assumptions than the science strictly requires for properly treated water in proper containers. If you've done everything correctly, the right container, the right treatment, the right storage conditions, you have considerably more runway than 12 months. The rotation system also serves a second purpose. It forces you to physically inspect your containers on a regular basis. Lids, seals, and container integrity can be assessed. Leaks, cracks, or discoloration can be caught early rather than discovered during an actual emergency when you don't have the luxury of alternatives. A practical way to build rotation into a system without having to think about it too hard: use a first-in, first-out arrangement. Store new containers at the back of the shelf or at the bottom of the stack. Pull from the front or top. This is the same logic grocery stores use with canned goods, and it works just as well in a garage. When you add freshly filled containers, the older ones automatically move to the front of the queue. For people managing larger quantities, multiple 55-gallon barrels for example, a simple notebook or even a whiteboard on the wall next to the storage area can track fill dates by container. It takes about 30 seconds to update and eliminates any guesswork about which barrel was filled when. Preparedness doesn't have to be complicated to be effective. The unsexy parts of it, labeling, dating, organizing, are actually what make the rest of it work when it needs to. One thing worth mentioning about rotation that rarely gets discussed: the water you rotate out doesn't need to be wasted. Water that's been properly stored for 2 or 3 years and still passes the visual and smell check is fine for garden use, washing vehicles, filling bird baths, flushing toilets during normal non-emergency maintenance, or running through a filtration system as an additional precaution before drinking. There's no reason to pour hundreds of gallons down a drain. It served a purpose being stored, and it can serve a purpose being cycled out. How much water do you actually need? The standard preparedness recommendation is 1 gallon per person per day for drinking and basic sanitation. That number comes from FEMA and has been the baseline guideline for decades. It's the minimum, not the comfortable amount, not the amount that accounts for cooking, cleaning, or anything beyond drinking and basic hygiene. A more realistic planning number, accounting for cooking and basic sanitation, is closer to 2 gallons per person per day. In hot climates, or for physically active people, higher still. For a household of 4 people, a 2-week supply at 2 gallons per person per day is 112 gallons. That's roughly 2 55-gallon barrels, or about 22 5-gallon containers. Laid out like that, it sounds like a lot, but stacked on a simple pallet shelf, it's actually a manageable footprint. The barrels take up roughly the same floor space as a standard refrigerator. For smaller households or apartments where space is genuinely constrained, WaterBob-style bathtub bladders can supplement smaller container storage. These are essentially large food-grade plastic bags that fit inside a standard bathtub and hold roughly 100 gallons when filled. They cost around $30 and can be filled quickly from a tap before a hurricane or other anticipated emergency. They're not ideal for permanent long-term storage, but as a supplement to container storage, they're practical. What about well water? And are there alternatives to bleach? Most of the guidance so far assumes municipal tap water as the source. That's the cleanest and most straightforward starting point. But a significant portion of American households, roughly 43 million people, according to the EPA, rely on private wells. For those households, the starting conditions are different. Well water typically doesn't contain added chlorine, and its bacterial load can vary considerably depending on the well depth, age, casing condition, and local geology. Before storing well water long-term, it's worth having it tested, particularly for coliform bacteria, nitrates, and any local contaminants specific to the region. Well water testing kits are available online and at hardware stores, or local county health departments often offer testing services. For well water that passes a basic safety test, the treatment process is the same: 8 drops of plain, unscented bleach per gallon. However, if there's any visible cloudiness or particulates, pre-filtration through a clean coffee filter or a layered cheesecloth before treatment removes the material that can shield bacteria from the bleach's effectiveness. Cloudy water requires 16 drops per gallon instead of 8, and an extended contact time is recommended. Now, is bleach the only option? No. Calcium hypochlorite pool shock, the dry granular form, is an alternative that some preparedness planners prefer because it has a much longer shelf life than liquid bleach. Sealed, dry calcium hypochlorite can remain effective for up to 10 years, compared to 1 to 2 years for liquid bleach. The trade-off is that it requires more careful handling and measurement. A 68% calcium hypochlorite product uses a very small amount per gallon, roughly a quarter teaspoon per 5 gallons. And the math needs to be done carefully before use. Iodine tablets and water purification tablets are another option, widely used in backpacking and military contexts, but they're generally not practical for large-scale, long-term home storage. They're better suited for portable kits or individual bottle treatment in the field. The bleach method remains the most accessible, least expensive, and most straightforward approach for home storage at any scale. The alternatives exist, and it's worth knowing they exist. But the $3 bottle of bleach at the grocery store is genuinely all most households need. Even properly stored water should be checked before drinking after a long storage period. The assessment is straightforward and takes about a minute. Look at it. The water should be completely clear. Any cloudiness, discoloration, or visible floating material is a sign to treat it again or discard it. Smell it. A faint chlorine smell is fine, expected even. A sour smell, a musty or earthy smell, or anything that registers as genuinely unpleasant suggests biological activity. Do not drink it untreated. If there's any doubt, retreat. Add the appropriate dose of bleach, wait 30 minutes, check again. Water that passes the look and smell test after retreatment is generally safe. For added assurance, particularly if the storage conditions were less than ideal, Running it through a quality carbon filter or a gravity-fed ceramic filter before drinking is a reasonable extra step. Home water test kits are available at hardware stores for a few dollars and can check for bacteria, chlorine levels, pH, and common contaminants. For longer storage periods or any situation where the storage conditions weren't perfectly controlled, a quick test kit assessment is genuinely worthwhile. There's also a basic palatability step that's easy to overlook. Water that has been stored for an extended period sometimes tastes flat, even when it's chemically safe. This happens because dissolved oxygen has largely dissipated from the water over time. Pouring the water back and forth between two clean containers several times aerates it and restores much of the normal taste. It's a minor thing, but in a situation where morale matters, and it always does, flat water that tastes like it came out of a tire is a small but unnecessary annoyance that's completely avoidable. If you're drawing from stored water during an extended emergency, cover your containers after each use and reseal them as tightly as possible. Introducing new contaminants from the environment, dust, insects, airborne debris, into a container you've worked to keep clean is the kind of mistake that happens when the situation is chaotic and people are fatigued. Label each container with a "do not leave open" reminder if that helps. It's not excessive, it's just practical. What everyone gets wrong about bottled water. Commercially bottled water is not automatically superior to properly treated tap water in HDPE containers. This surprises people, but the FDA regulations governing bottled water are, in some respects, less stringent than the EPA standards applied to municipal tap water. Bottled water is also typically stored in PET plastic, which is fine for short-term use, but becomes more problematic with heat exposure and extended time. The expiration dates on commercially bottled water are legally required in some jurisdictions, but they reflect the container, not the water. The water inside doesn't expire. What those dates actually signal is when the manufacturer believes the container integrity can no longer be guaranteed, which varies significantly based on the plastic type and storage conditions. A 2-liter soda bottle of tap water treated with 8 drops of bleach, stored in a cool, dark location, will outlast most commercial water bottles purchased at a retail store and stored in a garage. That's not a dramatic claim. It's just what the chemistry and the material science actually suggest. The common mistakes? Briefly. Using scented bleach is probably the most frequent error. Any bleach with lavender, lemon, or fresh scent added is not suitable for water treatment. Read the label. It should list sodium hypochlorite as the only active ingredient. Using too much bleach is the second most frequent error, and ironically, it's usually made by people who figure more is better. It isn't. Excessive bleach creates a water supply that tastes and smells heavily of chlorine and, in very high concentrations, can be genuinely harmful. Stick to the established ratios. Not waiting the full 30 minutes. The bleach needs time to work. Sealing the container immediately after adding bleach doesn't give the sodium hypochlorite adequate contact time to address potential contaminants. Ignoring headspace. A container that's only 3/4 full has significantly more oxygen available for oxidation and biological activity than one filled to capacity. Storing near a heat source. A water barrel next to a water heater, furnace, or in a sun-exposed area is going to degrade faster than one stored properly. Location is not a minor detail. Not replacing old bleach. Sodium hypochlorite degrades over time, particularly once a bottle is opened and exposed to air. Bleach that's been sitting in a cabinet for 2 years is likely operating at a fraction of its original concentration, which means your 8 drops per gallon calculation is no longer accurate. Check the manufacture date. Bleach older than 12 to 18 months should be replaced before you use it for water treatment. Storing water in previously non-food containers. 5-gallon buckets from hardware stores are cheap and widely available, but unless they're specifically labeled food grade, they may contain chemical residues from manufacturing that will leach into the water. They look identical to food grade buckets. The difference is in the plastic formulation, and it's not visible to the eye. Food grade means the plastic was manufactured without certain industrial lubricants and release agents used in non-food grade production. Always verify the food grade designation, and if you're not sure, don't use it. Finally, and this one is almost embarrassingly common, buying the supplies and never setting up the system. The bleach goes under the sink. The buckets go in a corner of the garage still flat packed. The plan exists entirely as an intention. That's not a water supply. That's an idea. There's a difference, and the difference matters most when the water stops running. The bottom line. There's a tendency in preparedness culture to equate spending money with being prepared. The market for survival gear is enormous and aggressively marketed, but water storage, the most fundamental preparedness measure that exists, has a reliable, tested, agency-endorsed solution that costs about $3 per bottle of bleach and a few hours of setup time. As preparedness educator and author Cody London put it simply, water is the most overlooked prep of all. People don't want to think about it because it seems too basic, but it's never basic when you don't have it. The combination of food-grade HDPE containers, plain unscented sodium hypochlorite bleach, proper storage conditions, and a sensible rotation schedule gives any household a multi-year water supply that meets the standards set by the CDC, EPA, and FEMA. Not approximately, not close enough. Actually meets those standards. And the math is not complicated. One bottle of bleach costs $3. A used food-grade 5-gallon HDPE bucket from a bakery costs anywhere from nothing to a couple dollars. A simple pallet shelf from a hardware store is $10 to $15. A household of 4 can build a legitimate 2-week water supply for under $100 in materials and maybe 2 hours of actual work. Compare that to the cost of a single premium freeze-dried food bucket or a tactical flashlight from one of the better-known survival brands. And the value proposition is not subtle. None of this requires special knowledge. It doesn't require a YouTube tutorial that's 90% intro music and product recommendations. It requires a bottle of bleach, some clean containers, a sensible storage location, and the discipline to actually do it rather than planning to do it at some unspecified future date. That last part is where most people stumble. Incidentally, the $3 trick is useless sitting in a cart. That's what $3 and some shelf space buys. Not a gadget, not a system with proprietary cartridges. Just safe water, stored properly, available when it matters. If this video helped clarify something you'd been wondering about, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find this content. And if you want more practical, no-nonsense preparedness information, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more where this came from.